There are people who can spend an entire day looking calm, while internally, they have already lived through 10 different versions of reality. A sentence returns, a memory opens, a face appears, and suddenly, the present moment disappears. Their body remains here, but their mind has already left. It goes somewhere invisible, somewhere unfinished. A conversation begins, not for the first time. Maybe with someone who hurt them years ago. Maybe with someone they never dared to answer honestly. Maybe with someone who never even realized how deeply they were remembered. And inside that invisible space, the scene becomes perfect. This time, the words arrive exactly on time. This time, nothing is forgotten. This time, the voice is steady. This time, they do not stay silent. This time, they finally become the version of themselves reality never allowed. That is why some people can stand under running water for 15 minutes without moving. Why someone driving home suddenly realizes the road has passed unnoticed. Why a quiet face at dinner may be carrying an entire emotional storm nobody can see. Because for some minds, thought is never just thought. It becomes experience. It becomes another life happening parallel to the visible one. And most people misunderstand this. They call it distraction, overthinking, lack of focus, but often that is not what it is. What they are seeing is a mind that learned very early that inner space can feel safer than outer space. And once the brain learns that lesson deeply enough, it repeats it again and again until imagination no longer feels optional. It starts feeling necessary. The brain has a system called the default mode network. It activates when attention leaves the outside world. The moment silence appears, the brain begins generating memory, prediction, emotion, reconstruction. It pulls old fragments forward and begins arranging them into something that almost feels alive. This is normal for every human being. Everyone drifts sometimes. Everyone imagines. Everyone returns to something unfinished. But in some people, this process becomes stronger, much stronger. The inner world does not appear occasionally. It becomes the place they return to most. And eventually, something subtle changes. Reality begins to lose emotional intensity. Because reality is messy. Reality interrupts. Reality does not pause when you need more time. Reality gives no second draft. But inside the mind, everything waits. Everything listens. Everything can be repeated until it finally feels right. That is why imagined conversations often feel strangely satisfying, because they offer something reality rarely gives control. You can pause, you can rewrite, you can remove humiliation, you can insert courage, you can become understood. And for someone who once felt powerless, that becomes more than imagination. It becomes relief. This is one reason why many people return to the same mental scenes for years. Not because they enjoy repeating pain, because the original moment never emotionally ended. The body moved on, time moved on, but internally something stayed open. And the human mind has difficulty abandoning what never reached closure. That is why one sentence can echo for a decade. Why one rejection can keep returning at night. Why one unanswered feeling can quietly become a permanent private theater. Sometimes the person knows exactly what they are doing. Sometimes they do not even notice how often it happens. They only notice that silence immediately fills with scenes. That music triggers entire stories. That one look from someone can produce 20 imagined outcomes before the real conversation even starts. And that level of interactivity is exhausting, because while nothing visible is happening outside, emotion is being fully activated inside. The nervous system reacts to imagined conversations more than people realize. Heart rate changes, breathing changes, muscles tighten. A person sitting still can internally be reliving confrontation fear, longing regret, or victory, all without speaking a single word. That is why some people feel tired after doing almost nothing obvious. Their body stayed in one room, but internally they traveled very far, and often nobody understands that fatigue, because there is no visible proof. No one sees the argument replayed 12 times. No one sees the apology imagined, but never sent. No one sees the version where they finally said what they needed to say, but internally all of it happened, and happened with force. Clinical psychologist Eli Sommer described one extreme form of this as maladaptive daydreaming, a pattern where inner narratives become so immersive that hours disappear, not minutes, hours, entire emotional worlds, recurring characters, detailed stories, private realities more emotionally charged than daily life itself. And what makes this powerful is that these imagined worlds usually provide something missing outside. Not fantasy for entertainment, but fantasy for emotional regulation. For some people, it is the only place where they feel fully expressive, the only place where nobody interrupts, the only place where their feelings are allowed to finish forming. And this matters more than people think, because many people who do this intensely are not weak. They are often highly sensitive, highly absorbent, highly affected by tone, atmosphere, memory, and meaning. The same person who disappears into thought may also feel music too deeply, may react strongly to films, may carry emotional detail long after everyone else forgot, because some nervous systems hold more. And when reality gives too much without enough safety, the mind builds shelter, quietly, without asking permission, without announcing itself. That shelter becomes imagination, and imagination becomes habit. Then habit becomes dependency, because eventually the brain notices something dangerous inside feels easier. Inside is predictable. Inside is emotionally editable. Outside is uncertain. Outside risks disappointment. Outside contains real people, and real people do not follow scripts. They misunderstand. They arrive with their own wounds. They fail to say the right thing. They leave sentences unfinished. The mind hates unfinished things, so it keeps building, keeps correcting, keeps returning, until some people begin emotionally exhausting themselves before life even happens. They rehearse conversations that never occur. They prepare reactions to events that never arrive. They imagine losses before anything is lost. They mentally live through rejection before anyone rejects them. And by the time reality arrives, energy is already gone. This creates a strange loneliness, because outwardly life may seem normal, but inwardly there is constant invisible activity, constant emotional editing, constant silent return. And one of the hardest parts is shame, because somewhere inside they know they disappeared again. They know time moved while they were elsewhere. They know another hour dissolved into something no one else will ever witness. And returning often feels heavy, a strange emotional drop, because imagination gave relief, but also reminded them that reality still waits unchanged. So they promise themselves to stop, to focus, to stay present. But then one sound, one memory, one unfinished feeling opens the door again, and the mind returns. Not because it lacks discipline, because something there still feels emotionally unfinished. This is why forcing people to simply stop rarely works. The deeper question is not why do you imagine so much? The deeper question is what keeps asking to be completed there? What conversation never ended? What version of yourself keeps returning? What need keeps appearing in disguised form? Because hidden inside repeated imagination is usually one unmet truth. The need to finally be heard. The need to finally be chosen. The need to finally say something without fear. The need to finally exist emotionally without being reduced. And once you understand that the daydream changes meaning, it stops looking like useless mental noise. It becomes evidence. Evidence of what still waits for healing. Evidence of what the mind has protected for years. And perhaps the most important truth is this: the people who imagine deeply are often carrying enormous emotional architecture inside them. They are not empty people. They are often too full, too aware, too internally alive. The problem is not depth. The problem is when depth becomes hidden so long that reality never receives it, because eventually inner richness must meet the world. Not perfectly, not all at once, but slowly, a little more honestly each time, a little less invisibly each time, because the goal is not to destroy the inner world. The goal is to stop needing it as the only safe place that exists. And that takes time, because some minds learned silence before they learned expression. Some minds learned retreat before trust. Some minds built entire private worlds simply because no one once taught them how to remain emotionally present without fear. That is not failure, that is adaptation. But adaptation deserves to evolve, because one day the conversation must leave imagination. One day, one truth must be spoken aloud. One day, one feeling must survive reality. And when that happens slowly, the mind no longer needs to rehearse everything, because life itself begins answering back, and that changes everything.